Going back to the usual format, each candidate will have 4 minutes to tell us whatever they want. Then they can take up to an additional 2 when that is done to expand, refute, add on. We then go to questions. And remember, your question must be asked in a way directed to all candidates, no personal attacks. Then we go on to a 2-minute close. With that said, Samantha drew the lucky straw. She gets to start first.
Samantha, can I ask you to stand, please?
Okay, I was just going to ask that. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't know if the webcam would pick up on that. She'll get that. All right, good morning. I'm just going to start off by saying that I am brand new. I have never done this before, and being first is slightly terrifying, but it'll be okay. Yes, I am Samantha Rodahl, and I am running for City Council here in Port Angeles. I do not see a familiar face in the crowd, and that is understandable. I moved here about 2 years ago with my husband. He is the new orchestra teacher at the high school. So we bought a house, and we are now committed to living and being a part of this community. Basically, all I want to say is I will listen. I think that's probably one of my best qualities, is being a good listener, and I will always take into account other viewpoints, even if they don't align with my own viewpoints. But yeah, I'm gonna stop there.
All right, very good, thank you. Mike, up to 4 minutes, please.
Hi, thanks to the PAB for holding these forums. Thanks to everybody for showing up in person. It's felt really good to get back to some in-person meetings. So my name is Mike French. I've been on the Port Angeles City Council for 4 years. I was born and raised here in Port Angeles. I graduated from the high school. I graduated from Peninsula College. I went away and got a Bachelor of Arts in Music from Central Washington University. And then I came back, and for the last 12 or 13 years or so, aside from most of last year, I've been running a restaurant downtown, the First Street Haven restaurant. Aside from my city council boards and commissions that I'm assigned to from a community service perspective, I've been really involved in the school district as I have 2 school-age children. So I've been the vice president of the Hamilton Elementary PTO for the last 5 years. I am currently on the school district's capital advisory committee, which is giving the school board some input on the Stevens Middle School projects regarding the capital levy that was passed in 2020. And then I'm also a board member of the Olympic Peninsula Community Clinic. I've been on the board there for 5 years. That was formerly VMO. We changed our name a couple years ago. And this year I'm the board president of that. So on the city council for the last 4 years, I've been working on a couple of big picture issues that I just wanted to touch on really quick. The first I would call good governance. And that's something where, in our first 2 years of the council, we hired a new city manager. That was something, that we were able to oversee a smooth transition between city managers, something that I don't think we've had in Port Angeles for a very long time. Sherry Kidd is actually really influential on that. We did cost of service assessments for all of our city utilities, where we, really carefully went through all the accounting and were able to set rates fairly to prevent large rate increases. We were depreciating at a higher rate so that we could set aside money for future repairs and replacements as needed. And while doing that, we really took a focus on debt. We said we don't want to incur any new debt. We want to start paying down debt, and we want to start refinancing debt. So in the last 2 years, that's what we've done. We've refinanced multiple debts that have saved the ratepayers a considerable sum of money. And then let's see, the second category I would call business engagement. Most of my assignments as a council member to the boards and commissions are in this category, where I'm the city representative to the Chamber of Commerce. I'm on the Port Angeles Lodging Tax Advisory Committee and on the Olympic Peninsula Tourism Commission. So, 4 years ago, this was actually a really big issue. The city did not have a relationship with the Clallam County EDC. That's something that we fixed. We now have a contractual relationship where we are a funding partner of the Clallam County EDC. And we've had a really close relationship with the chamber. Right now, we're currently, as Jim pointed out, we have this strategic planning and visioning exercise that we're contracted with the chamber on. The chamber's been really involved in our capital facilities plan to package, our waterfront projects into an infrastructure deal that we've delivered to our federal representatives, just in case there's any federal funding that's coming through the infrastructure package that they've been talking about. And then the third category I would say is housing and homelessness. Is something that I'm sure is going to come up in our Q&A. But as a new council member 4 years ago, in our first open-ended policy discussion, some of the ideas that I brought to the table were a multifamily housing tax exemption, which is a tax break. So if anybody's building 4 or more units in a multifamily housing development, they get a tax break. And I said, we should have a larger community conversation about this. We underwent a housing task force that was modeled after the city of Vancouver, Washington, where we got a really wide variety of community input. We had a year's worth of meetings that culminated in a housing needs assessment. Is that the whole time? Okay, well, anyway, we'll talk more about housing. As for that, I'll just say I hope to earn your vote, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. And John, welcome. 4 minutes, please.
Thanks for having me here. This is John Madden, the real John Madden. I'm sorry I didn't bring a grease board here and do the X's and O's for you, but I do have game plan up my sleeve. I'm a retired Navy veteran, and I've been in the Kiwanis Club, the Lions Club. I was president of both consecutively in Everett. Moved out here back in 4 years ago, I guess it was. Moved over to Solmar and lived in a rented house there for a while until I got my bearings and decided this was the place where I wanted to plant some roots. I'm a manufacturing engineer from the aerospace industry, so I've seen a lot of ups and downs in economies, national as well as local. And I'm a building contractor. After I finished my time with Boeing as a manufacturing engineer, I became a building contractor, which has been the love of my life. I also did a lot of house flipping back in 2004 through 2008, and something changed, something shifted then. It changed everything. And I got really interested in the way that economies work or don't work as a result of sometimes a government or oversight that needs a little local attention. I became a landlord because I was interested in helping the homeless people, and I learned a lot about people through that exercise. I wanted to provide housing for people, especially affordable housing, and I found out that there was some issues with personalities and with government oversight that made things difficult for landlords. Affordable housing is one of the most important things that we could talk about here. I'm looking at regulations that keep us from doing a lot of development in terms of affordable housing. So there's going to be a lot more discussion on that in the future. I took a little tour just a couple days ago to take a look at our homelessness situation here, and I see a negative impact on our local area and in our economy. And I do believe there is something we can do about that as the citizens of this city. And I don't know that we can lean too heavily back on the city council for work in that way, but I do have some specific ideas that we're going to be talking about in the future. John Madden, thank you very much for your support.
Very good. Thank you, John. Samantha, if you'd like, you could take another up to 2 minutes and explain anything else, or no. You don't have to.
Yeah. Okay. Is this on still?
There you go.
Hello.
There we go.
Okay. Yes. So I was born and raised in the Tacoma Puyallup area. I have a Bachelor of Musical Arts from Pacific Lutheran University. And some of my, what I'm doing now is I am a residential aide with Peninsula Behavioral Health. And I actually just got off of work at 7 a.m. So, and then I also teach lessons at the Port Angeles Academy of Music. I play violin. And yeah, with COVID, it's been difficult to get integrated into this community, but with things opening up, it'll be much better. We'll have the symphony going again soon, hopefully, and I'll be able to participate in that again. But yeah, I think that's me.
Very good, thank you. Mike, up to 2 minutes if you'd like.
Well, my main instrument is piano, so maybe we can have some, we can play together. But I'm happy to move on to Q&A.
Okay, very good. Anything to add, John?
No.
Perfect. Let's go to questions, and I know Dan in the back here, our airport manager, already told me he wanted to get a question.
Well, this won't be unfamiliar to many of you because I've been asking this question for over 10 years. So to get a little feel for your insight and your direction, let's pretend that once you're elected, you were given $1 million and you could use that money for anything that you want to for the benefit of the citizens of Port Angeles. What single thing would you spend that money on, please?
John, you get to start. You got a magical $1 million. You can decide where that's best used in the city.
I think small businesses would be my focus. I like what Kai was saying about the fact that banks are not lending anything less than $25,000, and we all know someone who needs just $1,000 or $5,000 just to get going, be able to buy some equipment, a vehicle, licenses, all the things that are necessary to get going again. Because we all saw how a lot of businesses went out of business in this last year. That's where I would put it.
Okay, let's see, then it's Mike. Yeah, $1 million.
So I just want to point out how really good of a question this is. One of the city's financial policies is when you have one-time revenue, you should spend it on one-time expenses. You can't, fund salaries because you might not have that revenue the next year. You might not have it, the year after, and you don't want it. So it's a really good question because there's a lot of answers that our own financial policies don't let me give you. Funding law enforcement would be a great thing, but we want to have sustainable revenue to fund those things. So what I would say is, seed money for permanent supportive housing. There's some really cool ideas coming out of Sherry Tinker in Forks has funding that she's building, for housing homeless veterans, that it has supportive services on site. So I would want, to say, how can we use that money? How can we maximize it going after state grants, going after federal grants, whether that's the Housing Trust Fund or community development block grants, because there's a lot of pre-work that needs to be done in land development, planning, 10% design. And so I think that's what I would want to put in.
Samantha, you've got $1 million.
Okay, I think with $1 million, it would be somewhat similar to Mike with housing, but more mental health housing. It is definitely something that is underfunded. There's a lot of great resources here in Clallam County and in Port Angeles, but we can always do more. We can expand, having stable places for people to live that have mental health issues.
Next question, Kai. And candidates, you might want to take notes as questions get to be a little difficult.
I'd like to ask the candidates the following. City councils traditionally have been thought of dealing with purely local issues, clean parks, making sure the garbage gets picked up, potholes fixed. Some think city council should take a little more expansive role. We've seen the last 4 years the city council putting its oar in the water on things like minimum wage for supermarket employees, or renaming holidays, or things that are a little bit outside of the lane that they traditionally were in. What is your view of the proper role of the city council? What should it focus on? Should it be just on keep the city running, or should there be other issues that perhaps might have a little bit more of an ideological bent that it is appropriate for city council to get involved in? And what would you do if elected?
And Mike, you start this question. So what is the role? Do we expand? Do we just stay focused locally in our borders?
So I think primarily our role should be focused on those local issues. I do think a lot of times issues are brought to the city council, and sometimes you have input on whether that gets on the agenda, and sometimes you kind of don't, if enough citizens are, talking to you. So I think when those issues do come to us, it's really important that we listen to our community, that we, stay focused on, for instance, the hazard pay for our local employees. That's an issue that was, brought to us by citizens, eventually got onto our agenda, and it was really critical that we had input from our business community before we made that decision. We had a letter from the PABA, we had some really good input from the Chamber of Commerce, and I think that helped the City Council eventually make the right decision so that we didn't accidentally end up wading too deeply into those ideological waters. But I think, yes, primarily our role is focusing on those local issues, and most of the work that we've done, I think the last 4 years, has been on those local issues. A lot of the time that stuff flies under the radar. It's not quite as glamorous for newspaper coverage. Not criticizing the newspaper, but just that's a simple fact.
Samantha, what do you think the role is of city council? How would we narrow that? What would you do if you were, or should we narrow it? And what would you do if you were elected?
So, I would start off by saying that local government is very important, and arguably it is more important than state, which is more important than federal. And I would use the things that we do locally to set an example for other places to make change in other local governments, or at a state level, or at a federal level. It's getting the things that work well in a small community. I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but like if you have something that works well in a small community, then you can kind of set that as an example for a more broader audience. And so, yeah, I think that would be something. It's kind of, yeah.
John, same question to you. Purely local, expansive. What would you do if you were on council to widen that out or narrow that in?
Well, I think that our local focus is extremely important, especially in the light of programs that we hear bantered about, like CRT. This critical race theory threatens to dissolve the fabric of our nation, and I think we all need to be very, very careful with our understanding of this and our resistance to it. I think it's one of the biggest issues facing us, and we can't lose our focus on this type of thing. Local governments have things like repairing the roads and maintaining the infrastructure. We've got a lot of talk about infrastructure these days. You got to wonder sometimes if the infrastructure that they're talking about is the same that we're talking about. I see a lot of positive things happening here in terms of the work that's being done on the 101. I was just sharing with Mike this morning about how impressed I am with the way that our local contractors are doing things. You can't always say that. So, I mean, if you take a look at the Big Dig in Boston, you know, the other side of it, it's coin there. So, I believe we can definitely work together as we have in the past. And I thank you for your support.
Did that get the nuances you wanted, Kai? Or thank you. Okay. Anything else from the candidates? Next question. We'll go to John Brewer, our member emeritus.
Hey, what are the three biggest issues facing the city, if you could tell us, three biggest ones? And how do you think those issues should be addressed?
Okay, we start with
Specifics, please.
specifics, please. We start with Samantha, the 3 biggest issues in the city.
Okay, the 3 biggest issues. Number 1, I would say is, I'm gonna be a broken record here, but mental health and housing. Those kind of go hand in hand, so I tie them together. But having support programs for our entire community. That would be number 1. I think that helping recover what we lost from COVID, like economy-wise, but also just community-wise, would be a big thing. And number 3, there's so many things that there are definitely places where certain infrastructure needs to be addressed. Lots of potholes and sidewalks are needed. There's some unsafe areas where people are walking between bus stops that I see on my street. And so having the safety infrastructure like sidewalks put in would be a good thing to have.
And to continue on with John's question, I believe he asked as well, do you have any idea, or do you have some ideas if you were elected, what you would do as a council person to assist in any of your top 3?
Yeah, so there is a couple places for the 3rd one. There are a few places in mind that I'm thinking of for repair. There's, I think it's Porter Street it's terrible. I drive my coworker home most nights or most mornings, and it's bad. And then I live on Fairmont, and I see a lot of people walking between the 101 and the transit center that's on Lordson, and that needs the sidewalk. What's the middle thing I said?
Recovering from COVID,
Yes.
economy and community.
I think that I know we did the JFFA, that was great to have that. Like I said before, getting the symphony back together, stuff like that, where we have more community-based stuff, will be good. And then the housing and mental health. I think that there's a big stigma about mental health and about people being homeless, and that is something that we need to work on as a community and as a society, and just humans as a whole. We need to work on that. So that's what I would do.
Very good. John, the question is, what are the top 3 things in the city, and if elected, what would you be doing to bring those about?
The top 3 things in my estimation are economic development, housing, and homelessness. I feel like there is a role that each of us need to play, and it's not a comfortable role. We need to be able to address our homelessness situation with a level head and with our hearts. There is a balance between these two. Not everyone that's homeless is a criminal, right? And there are a lot of people that are living here who don't come from here. The people that we do have in our midst need a certain level of respect and assistance. So I feel like we can have a coexistence with these people that is more sensible if we just become more honest about the approach. My little tour the other day with the homeless camps was very eye-opening. My heart goes out to these people. But my heart goes out to all the people that are paying taxes in this city as well. So that's one of my chief concerns.
Mike, the top three, and what are you gonna do about it?
Well, to me, it sounds like we're not going to get a lot of disagreement among the three candidates about what the issues are. We all, I think, are around the same 3 or 4 issues, talking about economic development, housing, homelessness, infrastructure. You know, I thought COVID recovery was a great thing. That's going to color all of our issues for the next few years, probably. You know, it's what can we do about some of these problems is where it gets really sticky. So, you know, for me, from an economic development standpoint, I'm looking to how are we going to grow a sustainable tourism economy that isn't reliant on poverty wages, right? How are we going to bring wages up so that our employees can find housing that works for them, so that they can be consumers of our own economy, right? So, you know, that's an issue that we're going to have to get through. You know, and housing and homelessness, you know, it's 2 issues and it's not. They're connected and they're not. And we have market issues on the housing side where people that are professionals, they can't find housing options that are working for them. People that are working class, they can't find options that are working for them. You know, Habitat for Humanity is working at the max capacity, getting people into home ownership, and that's still just not enough. And then the working poor, there's just not enough rentals. So we have market issues on this side, and then on the homelessness side, we have access issues and treatment issues where, you know, Clallam County just did a gaps and needs assessment, and some of the top line, you know, findings that it had was that we don't have enough supportive services. And that's a word that, you know, it's a tricky word when we talk about homelessness, because you hear people saying we have too many services and they're coming here for the services. But there's humanitarian services that are keeping people in place in chronic homelessness, and there's supportive services that are moving towards solutions. And we don't have enough of these, and I'm not going to tell people how to spend their charitable time and dollars, but you know, we need to get on board with, if we're not moving people into treatment and into permanent housing, we're investing in the wrong services. And you know, it said, hey, some of the key findings that access to those services is really hard. There's barriers in the way, and the availability is not there. And then at the end of that road, there's still not enough housing. So, you know, and like I said, then we can talk about infrastructure. And the question there is about capacity, about, you know, how are we, there's some generational equity. Are we making sure that, you know, we're not asking one generation to cover all of the lift for our infrastructure that's crumbling, because we're paying off debt from the past, and we're trying to set aside money for the future, and we're trying to catch up with this backlog. The good news is that we have a transportation benefit district that's funding some of our main infrastructure issues. The bad news is that the list is so long of our needs that it's going to take some time to get through those. We've seen some really good work on 10th Street in Port Angeles, where we have a completed project that has safe routes to walking to school to Hamilton Elementary. We've done some work on, you know, in other areas of the city. We're working on Lincoln Street and Ray Street. So the needs are there. We have, you know, our staff at the city has been really successful in going after grants and getting matching funds. For Ray Street, we have park funds. I'm sorry, I'm talking for a long time, so at some point the moderator probably needs to cut me off. But there's a lot of challenges. I don't think we're going to find a lot of disagreement on what the important issues are, because I think that's fairly obvious to everybody in the room. But, you know, moving forward, it's going to be a lot of hard work.
Anything else to add from the candidates? Next question. Mr. McIntyre, our Government Affairs Committee Chair. And remember, a question.
Thank you, Andrew, for that reminder. Okay, the wind-up is going to be a little less extensive for this question. There will be a question at the end. This is a business organization. One of the key objectives of any government that has to do with land use, policy, and the business environment should be to encourage capital formation and attract private capital to accomplish whatever business purpose that capital goes toward. One of the key components of capital formation in my mind is a stable and predictable regulatory environment and a fairly low barrier as far as upfront startup costs. And this particularly deals with real estate. So what can you do if you're elected to have that discussion amongst your fellow city councilors and to arrive at policies that encourage private capital formation and business development and so forth? You've all talked about economic development.
John, you get to start that. So stable, predictable regulations, and what do we do to have capital formation?
I do believe that regulations are the bane of our existence sometimes. One of the things we saw under the Trump administration was a reduction in regulations, and it was very, very good for the local and national economies. I'm a big fan of that type of energy, and I would like to see a lot more of it.
So what would you do to get that? Achieve that goal?
To achieve the goal of lower regulation, we have to always be aware of over-regulation and be resistant to it.
Okay. Mike, same question. Stable, predictable regulations and capital formation.
So it's a really good question. Just as an aside, I'm the city council person that a couple of years ago suggested eliminating the entire chapter of the Port Angeles Municipal Code about development regulations. So I think I'm on your side. It really is that startup cost is the thing that's sticking in my head, because we have a lot of, I'm just thinking about housing, and that's not the whole question, of course, but in the housing perspective, we have so many of our regulations that are just handed down to us from the state or from the federal government, and that's very frustrating. And so there's definitely some legislative activism that we need to continue doing. And some of those regulations have pluses and minuses, right? You might end up with a really energy efficient house that has really low utility rates, but the startup cost is just too it just increases those upfront costs too much, so that we just don't see that kind of development happening. So right now, from a local perspective, understanding what is under our control is the first step. And so, like I said, I suggested eliminating an entire chapter of development regulations. That led to us saying, hey, our municipal code is archaic, it's old, it's complicated, it's convoluted. We have pieces of it that are referring to outside documents that aren't even in the municipal code, because we have these architectural standards. And so we should do an audit and start fresh to simplify it as much as we can. And so that's a process that we're going through right now. And while we're doing that, we're taking a specific look at development regulations to say what is necessary, what is under our control, what is not necessary. One example of that, they get very technical very fast. You talk about setbacks, and you talk about, there's this triangle between a word that we all are going to cringe, stormwater. So the stormwater regulations from the state, we have maximum site coverage rules at the city, and we have parking regulations at the city. And those three form this triangle that shrinks buildings, because the state says you have to have enough green surface on your property. Our rules say you can't build on the whole property. That's the minimum, or the maximum. I can't remember what I just said, but and then you also have to have a certain number of parking spots. Well, the parking spots take away your green space, and all it ends up doing is shrinking your building. And so, that nexus is something that we need to take a look at. And what I'm hoping that we do is we eliminate as many of those rules as we can, especially that maximum site coverage rule. Another one is, and of course the parking requirements. That one gets a little contentious, but I think there's some really good ways that we can, reform that policy to make it not so onerous for especially businesses. Let's see here. There was another one I was going to bring up. Like I said, they get technical really fast. There was one that we're undergoing in this municipal code update that's coming through. But over the last 4 years, I feel like we've had a really good relationship working with the Planning Commission on a lot of these issues. We did zoning reform citywide that I think was really smart, because it wasn't drastic, it was targeted, and it was kind of that small step. We want to move toward a slightly more dense Port Angeles, but not all at once. And so I think that, and then the last thing I'll say about the business per side of it, because really I'm answering about housing, and that's not what the whole question was about. And from that business side, we're seeing right now kind of an unprecedented amount of capital investment in our downtown. And that's what really prompted the chamber to say, let's not lose this opportunity. And it started with the Port Angeles Renaissance to say, all these people that have capital that are trying to invest in downtown, let's get them in the same room talking to each other. because there's going to be synergies that they can have, whether it's traffic studies that they can perform together, talking to each other about how they're going through the permitting process so they can be as smooth as possible. But let's get them all in the same room together, let's talk about it, and then let's see what is the city's responsibility going to be for the next 5 years. What is downtown's responsibility going to be for the next 5 years? We have to agree on a vision, and then we have to have concrete steps moving toward that. So I think that's also a really important part of what's going on right now.
Good, very good. Samantha, same question. Stable, predictable codes and regulations, and thoughts on capital formation.
Well, we have codes and regulations for a reason. And I would not say that straight out eliminating them is going to be the best solution. I think first step would be to consolidate and ones that are extraneous that could be consolidated together. And then aligning our city codes and regulations with state codes and regulations, because like Mike was saying, there's some contention there, and that aligning those to the state can help alleviate that. So I think that's basically what I would say is kind of just like an overhaul of the regulations and codes, consolidating and aligning them so that there is more consistency between city and state regulations.
And Jim, did you get enough on capital formation from the candidates?
I'm still waiting.
Okay, let's run it around again. John, start off again. Let's really address what a city council person can do to help bring in capital and investment to our community.
Capital investment would be, it's important to have businesses feel at home, okay? If your businesses don't feel like they're welcome here, they're not gonna come here. There are people coming from Canada. I was just speaking with someone just the other day saying, why isn't there something on the waterfront where a person in a sailboat might come in and be able to buy some rope and a battery and just some food items? So there are holes here and there that need to be filled, and people will fill those holes if it makes sense for them to do so. If the regulations are too high, forget it. They'll go somewhere else.
Mike, specifically on capital formation and attracting capital here.
Well, I mean, I feel like I spoke to that at some point a little bit, but what I would say is, there's an old saying that every regulation is written in blood. That, a lot of these are in place because something happened and it didn't work out and we had to have a regulation to cover it, right? And I think that midway through the 20th century that kind of flipped. We had a permanent bureaucratic class that decided, hey, we can tinker and make it better. And there's a really good book called The Economist's Hour that talks about a lot of that. But I think that from a city perspective, it's not just about cost when we talk about regulation, it's also about process, it's also about time. And if you're coming in with capital and we're telling you you've got to go through this onerous conditional use permit process, the cost isn't necessarily going to be a barrier for you, but the time might be. How much time you have to invest, and the outcome isn't certain. And so, from a business perspective, I never want to be, I don't want to sell something when I don't know for certain whether it's even going to be possible for that transaction to happen. Certainty is so important, and we have a process right now where in many cases the outcome is uncertain because it all revolves around what is the, what is the outcome of the permit process going to be? What is we hire a lawyer to do our, what's that word? Hearings examiner. What's the hearings examiner going to say? The hearings examiner might say, no, and the hearings examiner might say yes, and then your project's on. But so removing adding more certainty to the process is part of it, and figuring out how we can make it so that, what we heard. I talked to our Public Works Director Thomas Hunter about this about a year ago, and coming from his previous community that had done a lot of work on this in Port Orchard, I believe. He said that the developer class, the capital class, was not upset when fees went up. They were upset about the time that they had to invest and the process that they had to go through. So they were happy to pay more in fees when the process was simplified. And so I think that's one of my main goals for the outcome of our municipal code audit.
Very good. And Samantha, again, any ideas on what you could do as a council person to bring in capital and investment?
Yeah, so there's one great example of something that I think will be amazing for this community. The Field Arts Center that went in recently. Not only will that bring local capital because of the arts performances and theater performances and stuff, but also we'll be getting some out-of-town capital due to the convention center being there. So doing something like that that is versatile and can not only be used for us locally, but also can be used for everybody else that is coming through. And so that's a great example of what we could do, and I'm glad it's done. And another thing, more electric car charging stations. I recently bought an electric car, and there's a couple great stations around here, but the amount of Teslas that I see on 101 coming into Port Angeles is, it's like every fifth car. And they're coming through, trying to get to wherever they're going, you know, over to the ocean. But having a place where they can stop, charge, maybe get lunch would be a great way to add capital. And then my third example that I was thinking of, what was it? This is what happens, I start talking and then it just
Same here.
goes.
See, we're all not alone.
Okay, and then, oh, yes, this one is a little more, so, I don't know if you've ever been driving on a long stretch of highway and you've had to use the restroom. That happens to me frequently. And we have the Deer Park restrooms, but it might be a good thing to have something available for people traveling also. So that's another example of something that could be added.
Oh, very good, thank you. Now I believe we have a question from Debbie, did I hear?
Here we go, Deb.
Treasurer.
There has been a lot of talk about infrastructure and housing. You, as a city council person, how can you facilitate better coordination between the county and the city in getting projects completed through the permitting process? I have a project in the UGA. People in the UGA do not want to be annexed to the city, but they do want the infrastructure, sewer, brought out to the UGA, and they're willing to, you know, put money behind it. There's private money that's willing to be put behind it. But there's no coordination between the city and the county. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. So as a new council member, how would you get these people out of their silos and working together?
And we'll start with the old council member. Mike, what are you doing, or what can you do to facilitate better county-city cooperation, especially with development of infrastructure?
So that's a really great question. One thing that we did in the past 4 years is we updated our countywide planning policies. And that's like, you know, step one of maybe 20 by the time we get to answer your question. But it's an important step where we, you know, had a great committee that we all sat down and said, what are our big picture goals for planning in you know, the urban growth areas and the county areas and the city areas too. So that's something that does move us towards better coordination. It was really great to have, you know, city officials and county officials in the same room. We had all the cities represented. We had city, you know, representatives from elected officials all in the same room. Randy was on that committee with me. You know, so that's step one, is we need to be talking to each other. You know, with regards to the infrastructure needs, you know, that is going to be a big lift for the urban growth area. I don't think anybody recognizes that that's going to be easy. We had, that one main line go down, and now there's people that want connections to it. Obviously, in my opinion, I don't want to, we have a lot of wells in Clallam County. We have a lot of septics in Clallam County. It is really ideal if we get people onto the sewer systems that we do have, because that takes a lot of pressure off the whole system as a whole. So yeah, and I would just say that as a broader point, the city and the county need to work together, and that's something that I think we all recognize, and I think that we have a lot of great, elected officials that, from the county level that are having those conversations.
Samantha, same question. If you're elected to the council, what would you do to help facilitate county-city cooperation? Do you think there's enough now?
So from my understanding, the city and county buildings are right next to each other. And I would say be relentless and annoying and go talk to the people that need to approve it, and just don't give up until it's done.
Squeaky wheel gets the grease. John, same question, and you talked a little bit too about how regulations are overburdensome. So what would you do to facilitate this better cooperation between the two governmental agencies?
I have a regular standing meeting at the Fairmount every Saturday morning where people, the citizens of this city, can come and share their ideas. We're already doing this now. I've heard a lot of really good input from people around here, and I do expect people to take a more active role in their local government. You can't just elect somebody and expect them to read your mind. I want people to come out and speak their mind and get things done that way, because we can't read anybody's minds. We don't have ESP, and I'm sure that's been a frustration for Mr. French from time to time. So I see that private funding is a bellwether for what needs to be done. When you see private funding coming toward a certain item, then the citizens that are providing that funding have a voice. They're speaking with their money, and we need to sit up and take notice to that type of thing.
Now, before Dan has indicated he has a second question, but anybody else have a question? Right, Matthew didn't get one yet.
And we have over here this one.
Okay, very good.
One question.
Just one. So, as Mr. Madden just stated, that he wants people to speak their mind. Recently, the city council had an idea, Upland Trail. People came out, spoke out against it en masse, and the city council was like, well, forget it, we're going to just change its name and still do it anyway. My question to you is, if you're elected to the city council and you have an idea, but the citizens come out against it, are you going to do what you want to do, or are you going to listen to the citizens?
There we go. We start with Samantha, who had mentioned that listening is one of her virtues.
Yes, so I would say, of course, listening is a great thing to do. One thing I would point out is this group that came and spoke out against it, was this one group of like-minded people, or was this a representation of the entire community? Were there different viewpoints there? Because that would be important. So, getting, not just listening to that single group, but asking more people. Sometimes I think there are decisions that need to be made, and the city council will have to make it, but listening to the community as a whole is the most important thing. Making sure that the community is represented, and then at some point, if there's a hard decision that needs to be made, that's why you're elected. So you'll have to make that decision.
John, the same question to you. If you're elected, what weight do you put on citizens' voice, especially if it's something against what you're want to accomplish?
Well, we live in a representative society here. We have people that we vote for, and we do expect them to address our needs. I think the idea of changing the name of something to avoid accountability is deplorable. I don't know whose idea that was, but that's not something you can expect from me.
And Mike, the same question, what is the weight of the community as opposed to the business dealings of the council?
So I think there always has to be a balance. Something that I say in my personal life is I want to be easy to convince and hard to convince at the same time. I want to be hard to convince in that I have principles, that I have firmly held opinions and principles, but I want to be easy to convince in that when people make a point that is a reasonable point with evidence and logic behind it, I am open-minded enough to be convinced. With the trail issue, we don't just have people in the public speaking their mind. We also have really important interest groups like the Peninsula Trails Coalition. This is something where we've had other public comment, with the previous issue about hazard pay for grocery store employees. We had the public saying one side and we had the business community saying a different thing. So we have a lot of different places that we have to listen. That's really important, that we don't overvalue one side or the other, that we have that open mind. I would also say that the trail issue is still ongoing. We've got a lot of work to do. We're going to have, I asked the staff to create a resolution so that the council can have an open discussion on what is the council's commitment to the trail that exists, what is our commitment to the maintenance of that trail, and that'll be on our next city council agenda. So I've been working with the Trails Coalition behind the scenes for quite a while on this, and so it was really eye-opening how much public comment we got on that. It was really, on one level, kind of refreshing to hear how valued that asset is to our community. But yeah, that issue is definitely not over.
And there was a question over here. Mr. Darling.
Sorry about that. Question I have to ask is out of the way. When we used to go to Victoria a long time ago, one thing that made me when I moved here is how close we are to Victoria and Vancouver Island. What would you do to promote more business between at least Vancouver Island, Victoria, and Port Angeles? Because when I go there, I ask people in Victoria, have you been to Port Angeles? Have you been to Olympic Park? And they say no. So what would you do to promote more business between our, and we've got port of entry. I mean, these people are going to Blaine instead of coming to Port Angeles to do with the United States. So what would you do, let's say, to promote more business between East Vancouver and Victorian Ireland, and have Port Angeles be the port of entry?
So John, we have over 450,000 people right across the water. What would you do to get them?
Wow. It's opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah.
What are the things that people travel across the pond for? If you look at it from the opposite direction, we look at Butchart Gardens. Lots of different assets that they have in Canada. So what is it that we have that people have come over for? And how do they get here? Those are questions that we need to address. Is the ferry running? Can we count on that? Okay, not everybody over there has a boat. But the people that do come here, what have they purchased in the past? I'm only 4 years here. I've been here for 4 years, and I'm not aware of that dynamic. So again, public input is really important, and businesses need to come to the fore to provide goods and services.
Mike, what are you going to do to get all those people with their money over here?
It's a great question. One thing like I said, I'm the city's representative on the Olympic Peninsula Tourism Commission, and this is a peninsula-wide coalition of tourism and business advocates that help to market the peninsula as a whole. One of the things that we've been really kind of it's kind of dark, but it's lucky, is because Blackball is down, we've been able to use Blackball's marketing experience, and we've hired them as our marketing consultants for the entire peninsula. So Ryan Mullane is, we get an hour with him every month talking about how we're marketing the peninsula. We've done some really cool campaigns advertising the Seattle area and the Portland area to bring people to our peninsula, because we really do have some unique assets. For Port Angeles specifically, I think, our challenge over the next 10 years is building up our downtown. When people come to visit from out of state or out of town, and they ask, what are the things that we need to do in Port Angeles? What are the top answers? See Hurricane Ridge, go see Lake Crescent. Those are telling them to leave Port Angeles, right? Now, those are awesome things. Those are great things. We need to build our downtown to the point where the number 3 thing we say is you've got to spend a day in downtown Port Angeles. If you don't come to downtown Port Angeles, you're missing out. And so that's, I think, a really critical aspect of how we market our city is we need the asset to be at the point where we can market it and get that return, clientele that are, just that have their socks knocked off by our downtown. And I think that we can get there. Talking to Ryan Mullane, he would say that, marketing our peninsula, he is very ambitious about where we can go. And so, obviously step 1 is getting the border open. That's something that I know Ryan and Blackwell's been working on, very tenaciously. But I think that, we are sitting kind of at a unique place in Port Angeles this time where we have opportunities.
Samantha, same question. What, if anything, would you do or have the city do to bring all that British Columbia, Vancouver Island folks to our lovely peninsula? And city, specifically city.
Well, this was a while ago, but from experience, going into Canada, getting in is a little bit easier than coming back. And so that is an issue that I think coming into America is a little bit harder. And we need to make sure that, like Mike said, your stay here is worthwhile. So really getting marketing and building up downtown would be good. This could just be because I'm a millennial or because I grew up in a place that was bigger. But I know a lot of businesses around here have very limited hours. And that's completely understandable because a lot of these businesses are run by the person that owns it. But there could be something there where if something was open on a Sunday, then the people that come over from Canada can go there if they're on a Sunday.
Now we're going to sneak one question in. It's appropriate. It's going to come from our timekeeper, so we're going to limit you to a minute answer. Go ahead.
One of the most prominent features of Port Angeles that I've heard from visitors, this would be both Canadian and domestic visitors, is that there's so many boarded up commercial buildings downtown. You drive the main route through town and you see storefront after storefront empty, or parking lots full of weeds. They say this place does not look healthy. So I'm sure that has an impact on the ability to attract business, and it has an impact on tourism. So what would you do to address that?
Mike, short answer to a difficult question.
Yeah, I don't know if there is a short answer, but that's been a challenge. Number one, we got to celebrate the businesses that are successful. We got to, and that's something the Chamber of Commerce really focuses on with their ambassadors program. So when someone does revitalize a corner or a building, a good example of that, New Day Cafe downtown. They just did, it's a really interesting example because, a few years ago, this council was talking about a vacant properties registry ordinance that would maybe regulate, and that's the bad word, but that would regulate vacant properties. We decided not to do it. But one of the issues about that is ownership becomes very complicated sometimes as buildings pass down through generations. The New Day Cafe building was bought by a family member of the business owner, and it took them a year to buy it. It took them a year to get through all the legal 12 different owners of the building through their various trusts. But now they've remodeled it. The outside looks very nice. They put wood paneling up and some really, they painted it. It looks really sharp. That's a whole new corner that's been revitalized downtown, right? So that, number one, celebrate that. And number two, a lot of this goes back to the capital formation question. But one thing that we really haven't talked about, which has surprised me is in this forum, is a really integral part of that is public safety. And that's something that, owning a vacant owning a business next to a vacant property is a burden on that business. It's a burden from sometimes a vagrancy position, from a graffiti position, and so, you know, having public safety.
Now, I'm gonna be rude.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead. That was not a good 1 minute question answer.
Prominent features, right? All these boarded buildings and things, what do we do to?
Well, I think I'm assuming that the overhead cost of renting a place in downtown is probably quite expensive, and that can be scary for someone who wants to start a business to get into. And I don't know, maybe there could be some sort of program to help. I'm kind of like, you know, with the less than $25,000 loan thing, and then, but something that helps people feel more secure in starting their businesses downtown, because if businesses are there, then people will come, but people don't want to put the cart before the horse and then lose out on their business.
Let's hear what John has to say with boarded buildings.
Yes, boarded up buildings are definitely a blight on our little town. And I think the first thing that I do is go after the graffiti. It's been proven that if you cover graffiti as quickly as possible, it doesn't recur. I've been personally scrubbing graffiti all around town for the last couple of weeks, and I'm finding it's not as difficult as it seems. I also want to see some economic incentives or business incentives offered by the Chamber of Commerce for businesses that not only improve the appearance of a business, but we could have a placard that would be like an annual thing, like you might see in Everett. They have the Monte Cristo Award. You get to have this plaque right in front of your house if your neighbors vote you in as a winner in the beautification projects.
Can I ask something?
Sure, please.
Okay. I just want to piggyback off of the graffiti thing. Having murals from local artists would, I know there's one somewhere, I've seen it, but more of those would be great, because I think most graffiti artists are not, their conscience comes in and they don't want to graffiti over that. That'd be great beautification, and there's just lots of ideas about adding art from local artists.
And we might want to push on the chamber again. They used to do a Business of the Month award, and we had a wonderful plaque. We'd go out there and really celebrate success. So let's celebrate success here. We've heard, regardless what candidate you like, for anybody to come and stand in front of us and take questions and to put themselves out there, they deserve our round of appreciation.
Thank you for listening to me. I know that I am new, and I probably seem new. I don't feel as eloquent as I could be, but I do have great ideas, and I hope to be able to express them in the coming weeks. So please keep me in mind, and just like I would listen to you, just listen to me, just consider it. But I also think that I have two great opponents next to me. I think that whoever gets elected into office will uphold the values of our community.
Very good, thank you. Mike, 2 minutes to close.
Well, thank you. I didn't really prepare a closing statement per se, but I really have appreciated the questions. I really have appreciated the debate. It's really been an honor to serve on the Port Angeles City Council for the past 4 years. It's something that I've greatly enjoyed, working with the people at the city, my fellow council members. You know, one of the most enjoyable parts of it has been the boards and commissions that you get placed on as a city council person. One of the great sadnesses in my life is that regardless of whether I win this election or not, I'll be rotating off of the Chamber's board of directors because I've been on it for 4 years. And you know, working with some of those people at the Chamber and the subcommittees and talking about kind of really big picture issues that Port Angeles is going through, and tourism development and shoulder season stuff, it's just been a real joy. So thanks for your questions, thanks for your time. I hope I earned your vote, and yeah, thank you.
Very good. And John, 2 minutes to close.
I would just like to thank you all for coming out. I'm glad to see that nobody burned up the last couple days.
Yes.
I'm encouraged by things like the Dream Park. I spent a little time over there on Thursday with a small group of people putting together some lily pads, I believe it was. And we had some great little volunteers to come out to enjoy that experience with us. It kind of reminds me of the time that I spent with Habitat for Humanity. I love service. I love the opportunity to be of service to my local community. And I'm so happy that Port Angeles has welcomed me here. Thank you very much.
Very good. There we go, Madam Chairman. The meeting is yours, and next week is the hospital candidates.
And, let's see.